name is Deepen, and I have the pleasure of being your MC today. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, I welcome you to the first ISAS-Khattar family lecture titled India's Rise in a Fractured World, Opportunities and Challenges. Our distinguished speaker today is Mr. Amitabh Kant, India's former G20 Sherpa and former Chief Executive Officer to the National Institute for Transforming India, NITI Aayog. Today's lecture is made possible by the generous support of the Khattar family. We are honored to acknowledge Mr. Khattar, Chairman of Khattar Holdings Private Limited, who is with us today. To commence the proceedings, I would like to invite Associate Professor Iqbal Singh Sivya, Director of ISAS, to deliver the welcome remarks. Dr. Sivya, please.
Mr. Amitabh Kant, former G20 Sherpa of India and former Chief Executive Officer, National Institution for Transforming India, Professor Tan Taeyong, Chairman of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore and President of Singapore University of Social Sciences, His Excellency Dr. Shilpa Ganguly, High Commissioner of India to Singapore, and of course Mr. Sirpan Khattar, who's our benefactor for today. Thank you for your generous donation that has enabled us to gather here. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, I welcome you all to the inaugural ISAS-Khattar Family Lecture titled India's Rise in a Fractured World, Opportunities and Challenges. Over the past few decades, India has pursued an ambitious development agenda and expanded its role at the global stage. It has pushed forth with formalizing large parts of its economy, driving digitization, improving the ease of doing business, and improving its public service delivery. India is today the fastest growing major economy in the world. It recently overtook Japan to become the fourth largest economy and is projected to grow by around 6.8 to 7% annually looking ahead. Now, as India looks to the future and aspires to become a developed country, key challenges remain. These include deepening structural reforms, expanding its manufacturing sector, and creating jobs. It will also need to ensure inclusive development and focus on various issues such as gender equality, gender equity, better health and education, support for small and medium enterprises, etc. Now, India's demographics presented with opportunities and challenges as well. Apart from being the most populous country in the world, India is also a very young country. About 43% of its population is under 25. And India is also projected to remain a young country for decades to come. Education, coupled with a focus on skilling and the attraction of investments, can ensure that this large young population emerges as a population dividend for India. Now, as you can tell from the title, and as we are all painfully aware, India is currently negotiating its rise in the world forums in a rapidly changing global environment. The multilateral order that we've been used to is under strain, global supply chains are fragmenting, and Trumpian tariffs are reshaping the global economy. In addition to this, emerging technologies like artificial intelligence are disrupting industries, while climate change poses a profound challenge to energy, food security, and economic resilience. For India, these shifts present both risk and opportunities. While vulnerabilities in supply chains and energy dependence pose challenges, India's scale, digital capacity, technological strength, and demographic advantage offer it a chance to lead in shaping global solutions. In this journey, partnerships matter. Singapore has long been a trusted partner in India's growth story. Following Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Singapore in 2024, both countries agreed to elevate their relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership. During his recent visit to India, Singapore's Prime Minister Lawrence Wong laid out an ambitious and forward-looking agenda for both countries that focus on, amongst other things, economic cooperation, skills development, digitization, sustainability, connectivity, healthcare, cultural exchanges, and defense cooperation. Today's lecture, then, is not just about India's future, but it's also about the shared opportunities that we can unlock together through innovation, resilience, and collaboration. And it is an ideal way to launch the ISAS-Khattar Family Lecture Series. The ISAS-Khattar Family Lecture is a forum that will feature eminent voices from across the globe and engage with transformations occurring in South Asia and its emerging role in global affairs. I would like here to express my sincere gratitude to Mr. Khattar and his family for their generous support. Mr. Khattar has been a long-standing friend of ISAS. He served as a member of ISAS Board of Management for several years, and I thank him for his generosity, counsel, and encouragement over the years. The sponsorship of the lecture series that we are launching today is yet another example of his continued support for ISAS, and it will enable ISAS to hold this lecture annually for the coming years. Now, I would like to point out that 2 years ago, Mr. Khattar published his memoir. ISAS was delighted that we hosted the launch of the memoir. And like many of you there, I enjoyed reading the memoir. And when I was thinking about what to say, I remember a particular line that Mr. Khattar had written in his memoir. And I think it provides a good segue to today's lecture. Mr. Khattar wrote, very succinctly, but very poignantly, he wrote, and I quote, "We have always lived in uncertain times, and we need to believe in change." Today's lecture will be delivered by Mr. Kant, and I believe Mr. Kant will provide important insights to how India will navigate the uncertainties of the global order and how it will adapt to the changes that are going on in the geopolitical and geoeconomic scene. Now, Mr. Kant is someone who truly needs no introduction, and we are delighted to welcome him as the first speaker in this important new series. Like all of you, I look forward to his views and perspectives on this most important topic, and thank you all for joining us, and I would like to hand over the floor to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sylvia. I would now like to invite on stage Mr. Satpal himself to deliver the introductory remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, guests, Commissioner Dr. Singh, I thought the introduction had been done. My family and I are honored to sponsor this particular series of lectures. We believe that this is a good way to build on the Singapore-India relationship, and I really belong to Singapore, but I wasn't born here. I was born in India, which at that time was British India. Later it became Pakistan. Sri Kanji, Dr. Mudiji, Prof. and friends. We welcome our distinguished speaker, who has, as I said, really needs no introduction in India, and I also think very little introduction in Singapore. He is famous and ably qualified to give this lecture. The topic for today's talk is India's rise in a fractured world. And indeed, the world is fractured. Opportunities and challenges are indeed very relevant and important topics for discussion. Sri Amitabh Kant's track record is more detailed in the paper that was sent out by ISAS and as elaborated on by Dr. Taylor. His track record is an admirable one. After a very successful and meaningful career in the Indian Civil Service, he went on to be CEO of NITI, which effectively took over the Planning Commission of India, chaired, I believe, by the Prime Minister. He was the Prime Minister's representative when India had the premiership of the G20. He is chairman of an IIT university. He's written a host of books on the Indian economy and related topics. If I were to recite everything about him, we'll be here for a long time, which is not here. You are here to listen to him, not listen to somebody like me. India's place as one of the leading nations of the world needs no validation. In addition, it is also the largest and most vibrant democracy in the world. The other democracy is having problems. It is also one of the top economic powers of the world. Singapore and India have always had a close relationship with each other from the time of Singapore's forced independence. The circumstances were trying, but we made it. India also has many challenges, and we live in a troubled world, as I said. We will hear from Srikanth about these topics. It leaves me only to thank our gracious speaker and ISAS for reading the talk, and to you, my friends, who are here. Thank you.
Mr. Khattar. So without much ado, I would now like to invite Mr. Kant to deliver his speech for today.
Professor Tan, Paul Khattar, very dynamic High Commissioner of India, Mr. Schilberg, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm truly delighted and honored to be delivering the first Khattar family lecture being organized by ISAS. Let me first congratulate Mr. Satpal Khattar. He's not merely a great legal wizard. He started off his career as being a lawyer, a very iconic businessman, a visionary who's built relationship between India and Singapore, but whose focus on philanthropy has been enormous. I would also like to compliment the Khattar family for laying focus on cultural, academic, and economic relationship and providing impetus to India and Singapore relationship. I'm truly delighted that this series has been organized by ISAS, which is an integral part of a very dynamic university, the National University of Singapore. ISAS has done some path-breaking work relating to South Asia. During India's G20, they took the lead in publishing the first book on the success of India's G20 and beat the Indian G20 Sherpa himself. And my book came much later. So ISAS is leading the charge of South Asia, which to my mind is going to be a very dynamic force for global growth on account of its very young demographics. And if 3/4 of the global growth is going
going to come from emerging markets for the next decade, according to IMF. South Asia will be a very critical driver of that growth. But I'm particularly delighted that this lecture on the India's rise, the fractured world, opportunities and challenges is being held in Singapore, which has been the bridge between the East and the West, and has always been a hub for trade, for investments, and for innovation in many of the emerging markets of the world. Singapore is unique in many ways. It's unique because of its development model, because of its path-breaking urbanization, because of providing great livability for its citizens, for recycling its water, for doing transport-oriented development, and for good digital governance, and more than anything establishing that governance has to be at the heart of good development. But more than that, I admire Singapore not merely because of its growth and progress, but because it was able to do all this with economic, environmental sustainability and with social harmony. And to bring social harmony and build up a multiracial society and driving growth and infrastructure is very, very challenging, but Singapore has done it with enormous success. And as the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, said during his last visit here to Singapore, that Singapore is not just India's partner, it is an inspiration to developing countries, and that India is attempting to build many Singapores in India. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly delighted to be here. We are living in a very challenging time. We're living in times when vast segment of population have gone below poverty line post-COVID. We're living in times when over 100 million people have lost their jobs. We're living in times when the period of stability has collapsed. We're living in times when multilateral institutions which establish stability have collapsed. We're living in times when global supply chains have got disrupted and there is an overall policy paralysis across the world. We're also living in times when the global growth is lowest since the end of post-World War II. And therefore, it's important to realize that India has been an oasis of growth in the midst of a barren economic landscape across the world. India last year grew at about 8.2%. This quarter it has grown at 7.8%. It is the fourth largest economy in the world, and in the next 2 years will overtake Germany to become the third largest economy in the world. Just a decade back, India was termed as one of the fragile five. There was inflation, there was a twin deficit problems, there was rising non-performing assets, the banks had huge unpaid debts, there was a breakdown of our economy, and India was termed as a fragile five. What has India done in the last decade to move from being the fragile five to the top four of the global economy? First and foremost, India brought in major structural reforms. It brought, replacing 22 taxes and 18 cesses, it brought in one tax across the economy and simplified India in a very big way. It's a digital tax, but it has recently simplified this into just 2 slabs and 1 syntax, which will make India very easy and simple as far as taxation goes. It brought in a modern bankruptcy law, and India was largely characterized as a country which had socialism without entry and capitalism without exit, but the insolvency and bankruptcy law has led to very efficient bankruptcies being cleared up. And to my mind, this also brought in a great amount of financial discipline. The third thing India did was to reduce the corporate tax levels to amongst the best in the world. And the government of India gave away a lot of resources, and if you see a very good balance sheet of the private sector today, is because of the corporate tax rates being brought down. It also brought in the Real Estate Regulation Act, which has brought in huge discipline in the construction sector. There are a lot of middle class people who used to book houses, never get them. But today, a huge process of due diligence has to be done before regulators give you permission. And therefore, the construction sector has brought in huge discipline and has been a very driving force of Indian economy. That was the RERA Act. And the last structural reforms, to my mind, has been a huge focus on scrapping a lot of rules, regulations, procedures, and acts. India scrapped close to about 2,000 laws and made itself very easy and simple. The objective has been to move from an era of licensing. The British Raj in India was replaced by the license Raj. To move away from licensing to a period of free enterprise where private sector can create wealth. So the first bit has been the structural reforms in Indian economy. The second has been a huge process of digitization. Almost India's only large country where every Indian has a digital identity, which is Aadhaar. So 1.5 billion people have Aadhaar. Between 2015 and 2017, India opened 550 million bank accounts, which were then linked with both the identity and the mobile number, which enabled Indians to do fast payments. And today, 50% of the fast payments in India are done on the mobile by Indians. 50% of the fast payments in the world are done by Indians. And Indians don't go to physical bank. I haven't been to a physical bank or a bank account or been to an ATM machine or use my credit card. I just use my mobile for all my payments. But that payment history then led to a number of young startups, MobiKwik, MindLab, etc., who started taking the payment history to provide credit to people. And then you had another set of young startups, Zerodha, Grow Upstock, who took stock market to tier 3 cities and rural areas, and that's how the stock market grew and expanded. And then you had another set of young startups like GoDigit and Acco, which started providing insurance. So India does fast payment, credit, stock market, opening of bank accounts and insurance, all on the go, anywhere, on the mobile, within 30 seconds and 1 minute. Between 30 seconds and 1 minute. And the Bank of International Settlements said that India achieved in 7 years what it would have taken India 50 years to achieve. That was the growth and progress of India in terms of technological growth. But what it led to, because we dispensed away with paper, the cost of acquisition of a customer fell rapidly. And a World Bank study shows that the cost of acquisition came down from $30 to a mere 15 cents. And that is why a young company like Jio could acquire 510 million customers in 9 months, because just using iris or your digital identity, they could acquire customers. And this model has been built up, which is open source, open API, globally interoperable, Because it's a different model from the western part of the world where Google, Amazon, Meta, they drove the technological revolution in the western part of the world. But when you get onto them, they capture your data. And that data is then used for machine learning and AI. But in India, we built a digital public infrastructure layer, a digital identity layer, on top of which we allow private sector to innovate. And therefore, India is the only country in the world where PhonePe competes with Google Pay, Paytm competes with Amazon Pay, and Cred competes with all of them. But it's all innovation by the private sector on top of the digital public infrastructure layer. And the data belongs to the citizens. The model does not allow memorization of data. The data belongs to the citizens, and that's why it's open source. And we believe that this is the way forward, and during India's G20, this model was accepted by the rest of the world, and India is taking this model from Morocco to Kenya, and even we've linked it up globally interoperable with PayNow of Singapore. So the biggest progress to my mind, the technological leapfrogging, has been through the digitization process, and many of these startups, young Indian startups, have played a very critical and significant role in this evolution. The third big story of India has been the story of infrastructure creation. So in the last 7 to 8 years, India has built about 40 million houses. 40 million houses, and I'm emphasizing this because we should understand the size and scale of what India has done. 40 million houses is like building a complete Australia within India. That is the size and scale, that we're building another 30 million houses in the next 3 years for the citizens of India. We provided 130 million toilets to our citizens and brought in behavioral change. 130 million toilets is more than the population of Germany, and we provided pipe water connection to 253 million Indians, which is more than the population of Brazil. So from water, and we provided electricity connection to 30 million houses, which is more than the population of Canada. So from water to houses to electricity connection to sanitation, for every citizen of India has been the focus. And the capex spend of the government of India has gone up from 1% to 4% of the GDP, but the emphasis has been that driving infrastructure drives growth and has a multiplier impact on the Indian economy. And therefore, infrastructure story has been the third big story of India. The fourth story has been the story of India's green transformation. And this story is an enormous story of India building up 253 gigawatt of renewable energy at very low cost, the lowest cost in the world. India has not polluted the world. Our greenhouse gas emission is 1/10 that of the United States. We, on a per capita income basis, we are entitled to 18% of the total carbon space. We occupy only 4%. But yet India has taken upon itself the belief that it believes that net zero is net positive, and that India must industrialize and urbanize through a process of decarbonization. And therefore, it procured 500 million LED bulbs and brought down the price of LED bulbs to 15% of their original price. It provided 120 million of its women with gas connection when they used to burn firewood. We've transformed the lives of 120 million women by providing them gas connection. And I would say that when we started opening bank accounts, only 18% of the women had bank accounts. Today, 91% of the women have bank accounts, and therefore our philosophy always has been that when you grow, women must lead. The Prime Minister's belief is that women-led development must be the driver of India's growth. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've given you a perspective of structural reforms, of digitization, of infrastructure, of India going green, and our ambition is to use the renewable power, 253 gigawatt that we built up, to crack water, produce hydrogen, and become the cheapest producer of hydrogen, green hydrogen in the world. Today we produce green hydrogen at $4.50. By 2030, our aim is to produce it at $1 per kilogram and export green hydrogen in its liquid form, ammonia, to the rest of the world. We are climatically blessed, and we believe that size and scale of India will give us a national advantage. But we now believe that its technology will be the critical definer of India's growth process. And therefore, we have a major artificial intelligence mission where we are providing computing power to our researchers and our startups at 40% of the cost at which it is available in the western part of the world. We are using Indian data to drive foundational models. We are supporting 10 of our startups to build large language models, which will be sovereign foundational models for India. We believe that India must create foundational models because India should never lose control of its history, its languages, and its civilization. We have a quantum computing mission, which is driving quantum in a big way, and we have a semiconductor mission where we are, from fabrication to design, we have just unfolded 10 different manufacturing plants in India, and we believe that green hydrogen is the way forward, and therefore we have a separate green hydrogen mission. Many of these are being driven through a scheme called the Production Linked Incentive to enable size and scale of manufacturing in India. So, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that much like we have done with the digital public infrastructure, we use that as a building block for artificial intelligence to ensure this huge advantage of many races, many languages, the diversity of India will become a huge advantage in the world of artificial intelligence for India. Having said all this, let me say that the Prime Minister set a very big ambition for India. From being a $4 trillion economy, he said that by the time India becomes 147, India must be a $30+ trillion economy. What he calls as the Viksit Bharat. To be a Viksit Bharat, a $30+ trillion economy in the next 22 years means that your GDP has to grow 9 times, 9x. Your per capita income has to grow 8x. Your manufacturing has to grow 16x. That's the challenge for India. And this is a critical challenge because very few countries in the world, Japan post-World War II, Korea, later Singapore, and later China, smaller country like Singapore and China in recent times, have had this scorching pace of growth. All other countries got caught in the middle income trap. Today there are 108 countries caught in the middle income trap. But when these countries were growing and expanding, ladies and gentlemen, there was free trade. The world was growing and expanding. You could export to any part of the world. There was no protectionism. When India started its long spurt of growth, India faces several challenges. And let me dwell on some of these challenges. The first and foremost challenge to my mind is the breakdown of the relative period of stability post-World War II. The post-World War II period had seen several institutions which had been established. All of them are in disarray. From United Nations to Security Council to the World Trading Organization, all are in a period of decline and decay simply because they never evolved. They never took the changing realities into consideration, and therefore they are on the decline. You're seeing a war in the heart of Europe for 4 years. The First World War was fought in Europe, the Second World War was fought in Europe, and you're seeing a war again in the last 4 years. You're seeing a war in the Middle East. So ladies and gentlemen, the period of stability has got eroded. You're seeing a period of conflict and crisis. Second is the complete breakdown of global supply chains. The global value chains are broken. The period which saw vast segments of population being lifted across China, India, many developing countries has got broken and has been replaced by protectionism. The biggest beneficiary of globalization has been the United States of America. There's only one country in the world which today accounts for 27% of the global GDP, 48% of the market capitalization, with just 4% of the population, is the United States. So the biggest beneficiary has been the United States of America. Europe has seen a decline in its share of global GDP. Every country has seen a decline except the United States. It's moved into a post-industrial society. And therefore, this protectionism coming in will cost the world heavily, and much like the Smoot-Hawley Act in the 20s, which led to a long-term depression, will have a long-term implication. So the second big aspect has been the complete breakdown of supply chains being replaced by protection. But having said this, to my mind, the third biggest challenge will be the challenge, because the biggest crisis confronting the world is this crisis of climate change. We are witnessing fires, we are witnessing storms, we are witnessing hailstorms, we are witnessing random rains, because last year has been the hottest year in the history of the world. And climate change is leading to rising sea levels, but the world may survive, none of us will survive if we don't take adequate action for climate change. And therefore, this lack of attention to climate, becoming climate deniers, will have a huge implication for the world. But having said all this, the breakdown in supply chain, the conflicts, the climate action, let me say that we are all also living in a period, we are all fortunate to be living in a period of the greatest technological advancement in the world. We are living in a period where artificial intelligence, machine learning, data, and robotics will enable us to do things which have never happened before. It will enable many emerging markets to transform learning outcomes, health outcomes, nutritional standards, which was never possible before. And therefore, we are seeing an era of huge production, productivity, transformation of lives, and the next 2 decades will, despite the breakdown of supply chains and conflicts, we'll see the biggest era of productivity in the world. And therefore, it's important that emerging markets utilize this opportunity to technologically leapfrog. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the global challenges. India is also confronted with domestic challenges, and it's important to dwell upon them. First and foremost, to my mind, India grows at about 8.4%, in this quarter at 7.8%, with just 50% of its population. The other 50% of the population live on government subsidies or are wage earners in agriculture sector. The government's attempt is to formalize them, to make them key players, convert these passive players into active players of India's economy so that India can have sustained growth over a 3-decade period. So every scheme of the government, from aspirational district program, etc., is aimed at transforming the lives of these people into active players of our economy on a sustained basis. The second big challenge is that India is going to see a massive process of urbanization. In the next 5 decades, India will see 500 million people getting into the process of urbanization. And that's 2.5 times the population of the United States. So the challenge for India in the next 5 decades is to create 2 Americas. And the challenge is to do it in an environmentally sustainable manner and learn from the lessons of many parts of the world, on how Singapore did its urbanization, on how Curitiba brought in good transportation, or how Bogota did transit-oriented development, and learn from all other developments in the world. And that has started to happen in India when you go to Dholera, Ashindra, Bidkin, or parts of UP now, or Noida, that much of this new urbanization will give a huge impetus to growth, because innovation is a driver of growth, progress, and prosperity. So that is critical. The third key challenge for India is that India has largely grown on the back of services sector. And India needs to fire on all cylinders. It needs to become a manufacturing center, and therefore it needs to export. Because all these countries which have grown in the past have grown on exports by penetrating global markets. And that would require India to build size and scale of manufacturing, much like what Apple has done in recent times. It also requires India to do sustainable urbanization. It requires India to enhance its agriculture productivity, and therefore all cylinders are very important. That will be a key challenge for India. The fourth is that India has largely grown on the back of the western part of India and the southern part of India. The more populous part of India, the eastern part of India, UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, all need to grow. They are the more populous part of India, and therefore this growth from these states at high levels, much like what South had done, will be very critical for sustained growth over a 3-decade period. And the last point I want to make is that India needs to improve its learning outcomes, its health outcomes, its nutrition standards, because physical quality of life, its human development index, is all very critical for India to grow on a long-term basis. So these are 5 key challenges to my mind domestically. It faces 3 challenges. It faces also the rise of productivity because of technologies. It also confronted by some domestic challenges, and sure, the government, the Prime Minister Modi's vision for 2047 envisages much of these transformations as he drives the growth story of India. But having said all this, let me say that for this vision to be achieved from 4 trillion to a 30+ trillion dollar economy requires learning from some of the best practices, building up great partnerships with countries, and to my mind there can't be a better partnership than the partnership with Singapore. India and Singapore have had a unique relationship. We have a very close, comprehensive strategic partnership in 8 areas. Singapore has been the biggest foreign direct investor in India for the last 7 years. It is our 6th largest trading partner. We do Simbex and Gold Kurukshetra defense exercises with Singapore. You are a part of the global biofuel alliance. Many areas we've been a partner with Singapore. And to my mind, the many learning lessons of Singapore in terms of its urbanization, in terms of its water management are very critical for India. And I think this partnership needs to constantly grow, evolve and flourish as India moves towards a 30+ trillion dollar economy, because there are many learning lessons from Singapore which needs to be emulated. Ladies and gentlemen, having given you what India has done during the last decade, having given you a perspective of what the global challenges are, what the domestic challenges are, and why India needs to work in partnership with Singapore, let me tell you that I'm a great believer that the next decade and the next century belongs to India. The next century belongs to India because the demographics are in India's favor. The average age of India is just 29. Even when it becomes 100, the average age will be 34 and a half. Rarely has a country not created wealth when it passes through this demographic dividend. India is the only country in the world which is today growing at 8% plus, which is making about 30 kilometers of roads and about 12 kilometers of railway line every day. Is the only country in the world which is making 9 metros every year. And it is the only country in the world which could launch its Mangalyaan and Chandrayaan programs in outer space and landing on the moon at just $74 million. Even a one Hollywood movie of Gravity took about $100 million, and it has demonstrated its great ability to excel and do innovation at very Spartan prices. And innovation at low cost. It is also the only country in the world which has increased the solar power 38x in the last 7 years, and as I said, is the only country in the world which has technologically leapfrogged to do 50% of the real-time fast payment in the world, where everybody does transactions through mobile. From insurance to credit, everything is on the mobile. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm a great believer that the next decade and next century belongs to India, but this would require immense amount of hard work, this would require discipline. But more than anything else, it's important to realize that India is a very large country. It's bigger than 24 countries of Europe, and therefore it would require every state and union territory of India to work in partnership with Singapore to emulate the growth model of Singapore, to become a highly innovative, dynamic, and a progressive society, much like Singapore has done. And if every state and every union territory of India emulates and replicates the model of Singapore, the next decade and the next century will grow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kant. We will now proceed to start the interactive session. I would now like to invite Professor Ria once to.
Thank you, Mr. Kant, for sharing your perspectives on facing the trajectory of India's growth in the past decade, but also highlighting some of the challenges posed by external factors, but also domestically some of the issues that India will need to grapple with in the next 10 years. I got the moderator's mic. I'm going to be a good moderator and not say too much, but I can't resist asking a question just because I have the mic in my hand. There's a fair amount of interest in Singapore about India's semiconductor mission. And as we know, semiconductors require an ecosystem. Can I have your read on how India is developing the semiconductor ecosystem and the prospects for that?
So, actually, India has been doing a lot of design for the rest of the world. The best designers actually come from India, and much of the big companies of the world, Micron, etc., do their design in India. But the objective was to take it a step forward from design to fabrication to actually do the manufacturing. And what you've seen in the last 1 year is the semiconductor mission being rolled out, which is about a $12 billion mission, which has supported about 10 companies coming in to do manufacturing in India. And we've supported them in a very big way. And our objective is that the Indian ecosystem in terms of vehicle, automobile sector, in terms of manufacturing of Apple phones, exporting them, all that has now created the ecosystem for manufacturing to take place. So if anybody from Singapore is interested, I'll be very happy to handhold you, and I'll be very happy to put you in touch with the semiconductor mission so that we provide ease of doing business, and we ensure that we get you the right Indian partners.
I'm sure with a lot of food for thought, and there'll be questions in the audience. So I'm going to open to the floor. I'll hold back on my questions first, but I'll go by the hands I see. Could I request that just introduce yourself and also keep your questions short and brief, that way we'll get more in.
Short, very short. My name is Suraj Bunyani. I live in Singapore. Proud Indian, proud Singapore. We have given a very bright future for India. This is how we see it. We're also talking about the challenges. The area which bothers many Singaporeans, especially Singaporean Indians, is the issue of social and religious cohesion. Challenges which are coming up on the breakdown of the religious cohesion. Give me some thoughts on it.
You know, I've worked with the present government for about close to a decade. I've been a part of its Make in India scheme, I've been a part of its Startup India scheme, I've been a part of lifting people above poverty line, what is called the Aspirational District Program. Not once have I been ever told that when you are implementing a scheme or providing benefits or anything, that you give it to one community or don't give it to any other community. Never. The basic philosophy behind the implementation of all these schemes has been saturate the whole village, saturate the whole district, cover everybody across the board, irrespective of caste, creed or color. Irrespective of caste, creed or color. So, all these schemes have made a difference from housing, to water, to sanitation, to electric connection, because we never looked at the religion while implementing. We implemented them across the board with saturation. So in the world of social media, let's not get carried away by what someone opposition says or others says. But I'm saying this as someone who's not a part of government anymore, but who's implemented schemes that never once was.
Sir, Vinod Singh from Singapore Water Association. So one of the questions, Mr. Kala, I was to ask you, how do you see the quality of infrastructure projects and its pace and its scale and complexity has been changing from last 10 to 15 years?
Well, one of the good things that we learned, at least I learned from Singapore, when I was doing the Delhi Mumbai Industrial Corridor, was to get very good project managers. And actually we selected some of the best people. We got J-Clubs, we got AECON, we got all these top project management units which were able to deliver top-class projects. So if you go and see Chandra Pitke, if you go to Tolera, if you go to see the new convention center in Dwarka, or if you go and see Bharat Mandapam, what you see is the quality of construction and the quality of infrastructure, the 88,000 kilometers of roads, expressways that have been built up. The quality of construction has taken a major leap forward. And I think we now need to do that in terms of urban waste, and we need to do this in better management of water, where I think we need to learn some of the Indian states and some of the Indian cities need to work with Singapore.
Fractured world. How were they shocked by what happened with tariffs, and what is going to be the immediate impact, the long-term impact, and we were considerably shocked sitting away to see how India, was sort of dealt with. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
So first is that we believe strongly in energy security. We believe in economic autonomy of a country. Therefore, we also believe that once you've squeezed out Venezuelan oil and Iranian oil out of the system, and then you say that India should not buy Russian oil, the international prices will go up enormously. You also need to realize that the biggest buyer of Russian oil is China, Turkey, and the biggest buyer of Russian gas is Europe. Europe is doing this when its per capita income is close to $65,000, the foreign minister said. $65,000. We had about close to $2,800 of buying Russian oil. Europe is buying all that gas at $65,000 per capita. United States itself is buying fertilizer from Russia. Is buying critical minerals from Russia. And you are expecting an emerging market to stop that and kill the energy security of its citizens. How do you expect Indian citizens to live without energy? So I think over a period of time, India has been very cool, very calm, very collected. I think the Indian political leadership has acted in a very matured manner. And to my mind, that's how good leadership should behave, and I think over a period of time, good sense will prevail amongst us. Because this has implication not just on India, it has implication for the world.
Could I compliment the question by while the India-US relations is seeing some drama unfolding, the India-China relations seems to be heading towards some form of normalization. What are the opportunities available to India normalizing ties with China, but how does India also negotiate the concerns over the trade deficit?
So, in 2015, the Prime Minister had gone to China, and post that, a number of Chinese companies came in. Xiaomi came in, Oppo came in, SAIC came in. Many of them came in and were doing manufacturing in India till Doklam happened. And Doklam was equally unexpected for us. India took a very tough stand, and rightly so, with Press Note 3 and said we will not allow Chinese investments to happen in India. You can't create crisis on our border and expect Chinese investments to take place. It will never be allowed by any democratic country. That's what India did. Now, that relationship now seems to be settling down, and over a period of time, I think one view is that instead of importing from China, we should work in partnership with China. So that the Chinese companies come in as a joint venture partner with Indian companies and do manufacturing in India. They should help to create much greater level of jobs in India. That is one perspective. The government is looking into it.
With Aziz Khan, I am from ISAS. I was interested to understand the challenges faced by India vis-a-vis what happened in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and now Nepal. How does it affect the challenge?
So, we are a democratic country ourselves. These countries across in our neighborhood will go through various processes of either elections, or they'll go through various processes of democratic upheavals. And India will have to face these challenges, as it has faced in Maldives, as it has faced in Sri Lanka, as it is facing in Bangladesh. But we would like a very good relationship with all these countries in our neighborhood. We'd like our neighborhood. India would like to be a good neighbor with all these countries. That is what we've attempted to do. But India can't get into the internal affairs of these countries. It's for these countries to solve their internal affairs.
My name is Abhishek and I'm a Congress economy resident. My question, sir, is you mentioned about some of the states having to take action. That kind of growth the entrepreneurs will also play an role. What is it that you see are some of the practices, policies, which will enable that growth, the entrepreneurs will also play an important role?
First is that the states must, much like the center has done, scrap all the rules, regulations, procedures and acts which they've built up over the years. India's had a very socialistic mindset. They need to scrap them. If you want the states to grow, India can't grow without 10 states growing at 12% per annum. You need at least 10 states of India to be growing at 12% per annum for the next 2.5 decades. That's the challenge for India. India needs not one Adani, Reliance or Ambani or something. You need 10,000 large companies. And for that to happen, you need to get free enterprise. You need to scrap rules, regulation, procedures across states, much like the center has done. In every sector of the economy, you need large players because only large players will create MSMEs also need the ecosystem to get linked. There's a backward-forward linkage. When Maruti came in, it created tier 3, tier 2, tier 1 producers which could provide to Maruti. And therefore, you need very, very large companies. Allow the size and scale to happen. Allow all these states to dismantle a lot of rules and regulations. And only that is why states like Gujarat, Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu are getting investments and others are not. Because they are fully liberalized.
Hi, my name is Rajput. Thank you for the talk. I was wondering, you talked a lot about the enablers. Could you talk about some of the pitfalls or obstacles that India must avoid in the coming decade so that it can actually achieve this vision that you've outlined, digitized, carbon efficient? Thank you.
So, to my mind, the biggest pitfall is in terms of, our ability to improve learning outcomes, improving health outcomes, improving nutritional standards. You can't have this high level of stunting. You can't have malnutrition. All this is a major challenge for India. If you want to sustain a growth over a 3-decade period, you need a very healthy young India. That's very critical. The physical quality of life, the Human Development Index will be the biggest driver of growth for India. Because India will be providing 30% of the skilled manpower to the rest of the world by 2047. All these countries would have aged, they will have no population, the population will all come from India. You will provide all the hotel managers, you will provide all the skilled manpower, you will provide all the machine learners, you will provide all the data scientists, but you will also provide all the engineers, all will come from India. You need a very healthy young India for that.
So, a couple of hands, I'm going to go. Will I come back?
Hi, Mr. Simon. Amitabh, thank you very much for the wonderful speech. The conundrum that I see we are facing is, on one hand, we have to increase the consumption of the population. On the other hand, we are looking for a very high growth rate, savings. For high growth rate, you require savings. And what we need to do is to increase the percentage of GDP that goes into investments. And how do you reconcile these two conflicting goals? Increasing consumption on one side versus increasing savings and increasing investment.
No, you're very right. The savings rate, there are two ways. One is to really rapidly push the saving rate. That's critical so that investments, saving rates is very critical. The other is that if you are to create a virtuous cycle of growth, the government's investments on infrastructure has to go up from about 4%, 3.5% to 4% of GDP. My view on that is that it should go up to as high as about 5.5 to 6%, because the infrastructure has its own multiplier impact. And the third, my view is that completely open up to foreign direct investments in a very big way. So get external savings. Why should savings from Singapore, savings from the United States not come into India, or savings from other part of the world should come into India? So liberalize FDI regime in a very big way. That will enable you to get good technology as well and put pressure onto domestic companies also to enhance their technology.
Thank you so much for profound insight. Just a quick question. How important comparative advantage FTA for India's economy?
No, they're very important. They're very important because I believe that people who come in to invest in India, they're not only going to look at the Indian market, they're going to look at India as an enabler for exports to the rest of the world. If you're not able to export to the rest of the world, you can't be looking only at the market size of India. You should be able to penetrate global markets from India. So opening up FTAs like we've done with UK, like we've done with the Nordic countries, like we've done with Australia, we need to do with Europe, we need to do with many other countries. We need to enable investments from India to get into these countries in a much bigger way. Probably the best one has been the one with Nordic countries and the one with England. We need to do many more. But the Indian government is now determined to push for FTAs with other countries in a very big way.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Devashish Rastogi from Venture Capital Fund. You mentioned about the growth of digitalization that has happened rapidly in the last few years, and in my mind the analogy that comes is China. And so my question is, where do you see potential convergences and partnerships when it comes to digital innovation, and where do you see divergences? Because you're clearly already seeing China and the US being different. Where does India play in that?
China's done a lot of digitization, but Chinese model is a closed source. It's not an open source model. India has built up an open source model. China has now learned that from India, and in this artificial intelligence model, it is DeepSeek beat OpenAI through an open source model. So therefore, what India built in DPI was open source, open API model, and there was therefore constant innovation by the private sector. But Chinese payment model is a closed model, totally. But Chinese AI model is an open source model.
I have to take the last question now.
And that is why China will constantly challenge the American model. You know, I mean, look at the level of investments which have been made in OpenAI. I mean, but Chinese innovators will challenge them with open source model because the China is saying that we will not allow you. Try to understand this. What they're saying is you're getting money from PE funds, you're getting money from venture capitalists, you're creating closed. OpenAI was meant to be an open source model. It has now become a closed source model. And what the Chinese are saying, we will not allow you to make money out of your closed source model, we'll beat you with open source model. So every day they are innovating new with open source model, giving the reasoning.
I have to take the last question now, so Sandeep.
Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. I am Sandeep. I am from ISAS, the researcher at ISAS. I was struck by this framing that you had of the challenge of bringing formal labor into formal sector, which is somewhat different framing than saying that we need to raise their income level to the poverty or something like that, right? It's a very different thing. So what would that look like? Can you unpack that? What would that look like, and what would be the cost of that? And who will incur those costs? Like how much of that will be government, how much of that will be those actors themselves, how will it play out?
No, so my view on that is that if you can't be the agriculture level, the agriculture sector in India employs 46% of your population. It used to be 41%. Post-COVID, it has gone up to 46%. These are low-wage workers. Low-wage workers. You need to take them away from agriculture into better levels of productivity and enhance their earnings. You need to push them into manufacturing of a large scale. There is no country in the world with this level of population which has been able to grow on a sustained basis only on the services sector. You need to create large-scale manufacturing to be able to provide better quality jobs. And therefore, the earnings from them should come from the manufacturing sector if you are able to create large-scale manufacturing which is commercially viable. It should not come from the government. It should come from the private sector as they keep penetrating global markets. That should be the objective. Everything can't be subsidized by the government. The private sector, the free enterprise, the market should take care of that. You should grow bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, look at look at Apple. It has become suddenly becoming the biggest manufacturer in India in 4 years' time. It has created a vast number of jobs in India. And so will other manufacturers who are getting in now will do.
I have to call the formal session of the question and answer session to close, but we will be having a tea session. And I encourage you to interact with Mr. Kant and pick up some of the questions. I know there are a few more hands here, but with that, Mr. Kant, I thank you for your insightful perspectives and your candid answers to the questions. So I think this is very important for people in Singapore to get a sense of what's going on in India as well as some of the ways which India will tackle these challenges. I think this has presented the ideal start to this new lecture series, so I thank you again. And I'd just like to just take a minute to say that you very generously highlighted that ISAS got the G20 book out first. Thank you for that. But I'd like to point out that we managed to get it out first because you helped us as well. I think that's an important point. You provided a forward and facilitated out. So thank you for supporting ISAS and thank you for starting this lecture series off as well.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Could I also ask you to join me to thank Mr. Khattar and his family for the generous support of this lecture series, and this will be an annual lecture that we look forward to hosting again next year. So please join me to thank Mr. Khattar and his family. And with that, I invite everybody to join us outside for tea and snacks. Thank you.